Matthew 24:36. So you ask me, well, why do I interpret Matthew 28:19 in a non-Trinitarian? Why am I seeing it as God the Father, Jesus, and either another spirit, the Holy Spirit, or a collective of spirits that represent one Holy Spirit, like Revelation 1 kind of suggests, or God's actual spirit, right? The thing that defines him as who he is in a metaphysical way that's beyond what we know. But we can relate it to our spirit the way Paul does in 1 Corinthians 2. So we have a basic understanding from these texts about what God's spirit is. It's like our projection of our personality, but metaphysical and related to his ability to do things from wherever he is and however he exists, which is beyond us. So what are we supposed to do, right? They start talking to us like they think, like we're supposed to know this stuff. No, most of you guys are just making this stuff up and then forcing us to believe it and claiming it's true. But it's not stated in these texts. And all this metaphysical stuff, you're like making these thoughts and coming up with these conclusions about things none of us have experienced in the way you're talking about. That we would then be able to say, yeah, it's that. And yet it's used as a basis for uncondemnation. Let's go. Okay, Matthew 24. Right? We know this text. This is one of Sam's favorite texts to lie about. He loves this text. He loves to hate it, right? Okay. Well, let's make it a little bigger. All right. So what in Matthew, right? This is Matthew 24. This is definitely better. And especially since it has the part I want to talk about. Now, this is before Matthew 28, right? It's context of the book of Matthew and what we would use to understand Matthew 28:19 when we get to it. Okay, we get to Matthew 28:19. Well, by that point, we understand. Okay, this text in Matthew 24 would help us to develop our understanding of what happens after this. Now, can I get my whole view out of this, of Matthew 28:19? Or do I have to go to Paul, 1 Corinthians 2, where he talks about the Spirit of God and Spirit of man? I don't think I do. That's a great text. I'll get to it later, though, in another show. Maybe tomorrow with Jake or Thursday. When I deal with William again and Jake. So, we're trying to interpret Matthew 28. We've been reading Matthew. When we get a text, we have this text informing our understanding of Matthew 28:19, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. It says, this is Jesus. About that day or hour, no one knows. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Right? And as most of us know, the word for only is right there, monos. Now, Trinitarians only want this to mean only according to the Trinity. But again, that's assuming your doctrine, right? We just talked about how we don't have anything that expressly states consubstantiality or even Middle Platonism in a way that we could use to interpret these texts, and specifically Matthew 28:19. We brought up their main attempt to try to get that consubstantiality in the New Testament and then use potentially for Matthew 28 with John 10:30, but it doesn't work, right? And if anything, it's the least likely interpretation at best. That's not sufficient to use to reinterpret text and then use as basis to condemn people, right? Okay, so what would I do? And do I have enough basis to condemn or otherwise say, no, you're a heretic, right? I think everything's reversed. It's crazy, right? Because I believe I can show you expressly stated beliefs that are what I can use to interpret Matthew 28:19 and do. Namely this right here. So what do we have here? And we're not going to really get into the whole two natures thing. That's not what I'm really getting at. I mean, it could be related to it. It's not here, though. It'd be the same question, same issue. You want to interpret this? They want to interpret this according to 5th century Chalcedonian theology. or even if they want to try to use their earlier type of writers or whatever, it's not something they can show you in Matthew, or I believe the New Testament. But it's not really what I'm getting at here, so don't worry. Remember, I'm trying to gain a basis for understanding Matthew 28:19. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Is that Trinity, or what do I do? Right? We're talking about the best available reasons to understand something, to interpret the Bible in this case, so that we know what to do. Not just accept what an ecclesiastical system or other authority tell us we're supposed to believe. Tell us these things mean. Okay, so setting aside the two natures thing, since I'm not focused on that right now, it's not relevant. You'll see. Who's in this text? The angels, right? The angels in heaven. And here you again get a distinction, right? There are obviously angels on earth. He's one of them, right? That's why he distinguishes himself. He's not in heaven. He's on the earth as a man. But of course, there are other angels who are on earth too. Any described messenger, right? The angels all throughout the book of Genesis, in human sense, that are sent forth. John, others. So, it's really easy to show. But so we have the angels in heaven, right? Spirit beings. Okay. And then we have the Son. He's talking about himself. And he's saying, the angels in heaven and the Son don't know this. Only the Father knows that, right? And we all kind of know this, but it's a little different, you'll see. So just focus. So Jesus says, this day and hour no one knows. Now, you know how Trinitarians, they get really pumped up when they see like all these explicit denials or over-encompassing terms in ways like in John 1:3, like nothing and no one and nothing was created without him, right? And so they kind of like really emphasize that. Like, look, it says nothing and no one, no, not one single thing, right? Well, I mean, look here. Look at all the negatives you have here. One, oudes, no one knows. Oude, neither the angels of the heavens, nor. Right? There's three right there. Right? And this is it's a negative, but it's like an idiom. Ame. That's how in Greek and this time you say only, or can say only. I'm sorry. If. It's more of a if not. Other than. It's kind of like except. That's what I meant to say. My bad. Only is this word right here. Monos. So if not, there's a negative there, but I'm not really counting it as a negative because it's a part of an idiom that means except, but only. That's the way they translate it, right? Let's see what's down here. Only the fathers. Only the Father. But the Father alone. See, so Holman Christian, except the Father only. That's correct. That actually includes a translation of all these words, right? Ame. And this Scrivener is a little different, but it's different textually. But it's got the same keywords we're talking about. Right? So that actually means except, and that means only. Concerning that day and hour, no one knows, neither the angels in heaven nor the Son, except the Father only. So how would this help me understand Matthew 28:19? Well, what does he say? He says, right, go baptizing in the name of the Father. So how would this text help me understand the Father when I get to Matthew 28:19? Well, it basically says there's something about the Father that's not true of anyone else, right? Even if I'm not, again, you can believe in your two natures thing. I'm not getting at the Son not knowing here. That's not what I'm really talking about. It will come up in a minute, but it's not like, I'm not like normally. This is a little bit broader point. So control yourself, Sam. right? The Father is definitely put at the highest possible level, right? Remember, I'm just using a text that I think in its totality, one text, gives me basic, there's more in Matthew, right? I'm not saying you wouldn't use all of it. You, as a Trinitarian, as I've said, you can use any text you want to try to give me your consubstantiality for Matthew 28. I even brought up your John 10 thing already. I'm just showing you what I would go to first. The first piece of Matthew, and there's more in Matthew and more in the New Testament, I could point to for understanding Matthew 28. But I think I can do what you can't do. I don't believe a Trinitarian can give me evidence that explicitly states what would require consubstantiality. John 10:30 is all they got. And again, that's the least likely interpretation at best. It has to be, because it doesn't say that. And Jesus tells us, just as using the term you tell us means the same thing, what it means with regard to him and the Father and us. So you want to say it means something else beyond what he says is true for him, the Father, and us. So there's no way your interpretation could be better than ours. Ours is explicitly stated as what it means. Okay. So I don't think Trinitarians have that. I don't think they have this from a middle Platonic or developed Trinitarian thought evidence that you could point to and say, see, textually, there's consubstantiality, right? Kelly likes to bring up the whole man and woman and man, so we'll talk about it. But again, that's an interpretation, and it doesn't say that. But there's nothing. So why is this explicit? Why do I get to make a division between the Father, the Son, and in my view, God's Spirit? So my view of the Holy Spirit is that it's God's Spirit. I think it's possible, because I don't try to make definitive claims when I'm not told to do so by the source material that I accepted as an authority. I don't make definitive claims about metaphysics. No, because I don't know. We're not metaphysic, right? We don't exist in those areas or realms. So unless we have evidence textually that we accept as an authority or experience with a divinity that we can use objectively with others, what are we talking about? Why are we making all this stuff up and requiring other people to believe it? Are we sure we have the evidence from the text or other texts to use to interpret these texts? I don't think Trinitarians do. I don't think they have the Matthew or New Testament evidence to use to interpret baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I don't think there's any consubstantial basis to use in Matthew or the New Testament. And I already talked about their best one, that it's not. Okay, so back to me, in my view, non-consubstantiality, and even for me, right, since I believe that God's Spirit is the Holy Spirit, it's not like an angel. It could be. I'm not, as you all know, I've stated that's a possibility. And it's not like a very small possibility either. Jesus literally speaks of the Holy Spirit in personal terms. It is hearing from the Father and being sent, right? Clearly, in my view, no Trinitarian, but this is why I'm telling you why I think it could be an angel of some kind. It's definitely angelic, being used as a messenger. Not Sam's view necessarily, right? He doesn't understand. And then Revelation 1, right? So there's more going on there, or potentially going on, that I'm willing to over-define and use as a club to hit people over the head with. I'm not going to do that. But the Bible refers to God's Spirit far more frequently than it does it as the kind of personal messenger agent we see with Jesus in John 15 and 16. And Paul in 1 Corinthians 2 personalizes God's Spirit after comparing it with man's spirit in a way that would explain what Jesus is talking about in John 15 and 16. So I'm more comfortable biblically, like what we're talking about, the aggregate of the best evidence, teaching the Holy Spirit, Matthew 28:19, is God's Spirit. It's what he uses, right? So I've already mentioned a couple texts I would use as evidence, like 1 Corinthians 2. But how would I get that out of this? Do I need to go to 1 Corinthians 2? Right? Or can I get everything I would use for Matthew 28 here? I think I can. You may say, well, where's the Holy Spirit, right? How are you getting explicit basis for interpreting a text about the Holy Spirit that doesn't mention the Holy Spirit. Because I believe it's mentioned by not being mentioned. I believe its absence includes it. So, if the Holy Spirit were a separate spirit, right, person, like angel or other person, whatever, at this point, is separate spirit, not God's, actual being's spirit, him. How am I getting, if it's not mentioned here, how is that including it? Well, so you remember how I said how Trinitarians love to do that? There's no and no single and no and no, 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 no. So they try to overbroaden it, I think. Well, I mean, this is about as broad as you can get, right? Look at all these negatives we have here. No one knows. Neither the angels, neither the Son, except the Father. Only, right? That's about as exclusive as you can make it. Right? I mean, there's no more definitive way to state that only the Father knows this information. Okay? Even if you use your, fine, keep your dual nature for now. That's not my point. Not talking about that. Does everyone agree, even with you Trinitarians and your dual nature understanding, that this is about as emphatic as you can make it on that? Who knows this information, right? Okay, so how could the Holy Spirit not be mentioned here? If you want us to have if you want us to go to Matthew 28:19 and tell us that when Jesus said that, he was telling us to baptize in the name of an individual, of a person of the Trinity, we would have to know what that is, right? Again, that's why I'm asking, where's your understanding of this that would be used to know what he's even talking about? How are we supposed to know what to do, right? Well, I believe we do know what to do by that point because of texts like this. The fact that the Holy Spirit isn't mentioned here and the exclusivity is given to the Father, well, my view is that the Holy Spirit is the Father's Spirit, God's Spirit, which is stated explicitly all throughout the Bible. God sent his Spirit, right? His Spirit, God's Spirit. There's explicit references all throughout the Bible, with and without the pronoun, possessive, his. Well, so then that's included. My view of the Holy Spirit is included with the Father because it's not a separate person. That's why Jesus doesn't mention it here. So when I get to Matthew 28:19, why would I think the Holy Spirit is a person, Trinity or non, right, like an angel? Well, I'm not totally disagreeing with that, though. In fact, I think it has some really good possibilities. But overall, no, I don't think so. Why would I think that in Matthew 28:19? Why would I think the Holy Spirit is a separate person of any kind, angel or Trinitarian person, when Jesus doesn't even reference it as one of the possible people that would know this? How could that? It just seems so odd to me that we're supposed to then turn around and view the Holy Spirit as a person when neither this text nor the account in Mark that I was going to start with present the Holy Spirit as a person in the context of as broad, right? It's everyone. Look, about that day or hour, no one knows, right? This is everyone. This is all humans. No one knows. All humanity, right there. Nor the angels in heaven. All the spirit angels, right there. Nor the Son. The only angel who's not in heaven, or person of the Trinity who's not in heaven, who's on earth, he's right there. He says right there, he doesn't know. So no human being knows. No angel in heaven knows. And the Son doesn't know. The Father knows, and he emphasizes it by only. Okay, so if we can't interpret this text the way it's written, that only the Father knows this, again, you can keep your dual nature for Jesus right now. I'm not getting to that. I'm talking about the Holy Spirit, Matthew 28:19, and the Trinity. If we can't read this text from Jesus and conclude that only the Father knows this information, right? Again, I'm not getting to the two nature thing, okay? Calm down, Sam. Talk about what it says. Are we able to read this text and answer someone and say, okay, who knows that information? Does anyone know that? What should the answer be? If someone said, hey, what does that text say? Who knows that information about the day and the hour? No one? The answer should be no. Only the Father, right? That's the answer when someone says, what does Matthew 24:36 say about who knows the day and the hour? The answer is only the Father, right? Unless you are not going to pass on the teachings of Jesus, the answer is only the Father knows that. No, not the Son, not the angels in heaven, and no one, meaning us, all of us. Only the Father. If the Holy Spirit also knew this as a separate person, that Jesus wanted us to understand as such in Matthew 28, this does not give us a basis for doing so. This gives me a basis, and others like me a basis, for not doing so. For saying, well, wait a minute. He's talking about something that's a conscious person would have to know or not know, right? Knowledge, oiden. And then he says, no one, no person, period. Not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, only the Father. There's no reason to omit the Holy Spirit here unless it's not a person that would know this. And even the Holy Spirit in John 15:16 with Jesus and 1 Corinthians 2 has to hear from the Father. It's God's Spirit that Paul says searches the mind of God. Compares it with our spirit. You see, that contradicts you guys and, of course, God's whole, his knowledge, right? But that's a separate question. But my point is, it's God's Spirit. I believe it's God's Spirit. That literally is what the Bible describes it as. His Spirit, God's Spirit, my Spirit. And compares it with man's in 1 Corinthians 2, and it has to search his mind, and then it learns everything. It's God, his Spirit within himself, complete in his being. It's not like these Middle Platonists, as you're going to see. That text is going to come up more, you'll see. But still. And Jesus even says the Spirit hears from the Father. He's going to send it, the Father sends it, and it has to learn from the Father. So there's no understanding of Holy Spirit that would make it an exception to this. You understand? Right? Because it has to learn from the Father. So it would also then not know what only the Father knows. Unless only the Father doesn't know it, right? Either Jesus is telling us the truth or not. And if he is telling us the truth, I believe that proves this reference to the Father includes his Holy Spirit. Because it's his Spirit. It's not a separate person. So when you refer to the Father, you refer to God, you're always referring to his Spirit, in my view. Again, what I can defend from the Bible. I've already stated several texts, right? 1 Corinthians 2. The fact that it's not referenced as a separate person that would even have the potential of knowing this here, when every other existing person is included in this text, everyone. Show me one being that's explicitly not included here. I'll tell you, if the Holy Spirit's a being, that's the one. And why would that be the case? That doesn't make any sense. You literally are going to get all three referenced in a few chapters here. So either the Holy Spirit is a person that knows or doesn't know and should be referenced here as such, right? Or it is referenced here because it's the Father's Spirit. There is no rational explanation for not including the Holy Spirit here and then including it in Matthew 28:19 telling us to go baptizing people in the name of the Holy Spirit, but they don't know what it is? Well, I believe they did. It's God's Spirit, just like the Bible teaches, like I said, all over the place. So again, without this consubstantiality, right, or this explicit personhood in a way that would be Trinitarian, right? Again, I do believe you can argue effectively for the personhood of the Holy Spirit, like then the text I mentioned. So I hold that as an optional view because I'm not here to condemn people for reasonable beliefs. But those texts they don't give you the Trinitarianism you need. The Holy Spirit's learning in those texts. That's anti-Trinitarian. Like I destroyed Sam over on those as well. So the only other personal view of the Holy Spirit you could get outside of it being the Father's Spirit would be with these limitations, right? The same limitations that the Son would have, which would then be non-Trinitarian, so you couldn't use it for your consubstantiality. So again, I'm left with the question of, how are you getting the consubstantiality into Matthew 28:19 if you don't have anything explicit you can use from Matthew or the New Testament that's in any way at least the most credible interpretation of any text that tells what it means? Whereas by contrast, I can go a couple chapters earlier than Matthew 28:19 and give you one single text that can provide the basis for my whole understanding of what he says about those three. Because it is literally, in one sense, right? It's not like everything. But it tells me right here, the Son is a person who doesn't know something the Father knows. So, to me, there's no reason to think they have consubstantial sharing of the same eternal co-equal nature. Wouldn't even occur to me, right? Based on that. You can still think, based on your later Trinitarianism, that there's a dual nature explanation. That's not what I'm really getting at. Outside, again, we're not assuming those things here. Remember what I told you. We're looking for the express description of your Trinitarianism in these texts, whether it's consubstantiality or, co-equality in a way that would provide a basis for Matthew 28 telling us that's what the Holy Spirit is there. Well, right here, it's telling us the Son is an equal in some way to the Father. You have an explanation for that. That's not true, but we're not going to go off on it. Well, what do you have to say about the Holy Spirit? This is broad, right? You guys tell us John 1:3 has it's the all creation context, not just Genesis 1 physical. And it's just not one single thing and no, nothing. And like there's nothing we can do. You don't want us to have any possible exception, which is absurd, of course. It defies the context and the use of terms like all, and even for you. But either way, it shows your hypocrisy again, right? I mean, we're getting multiple negatives and an exclusivity with monos in one text. And you guys still try to tell us that the Son does know this at this time in his divine nature, and the Holy Spirit in Matthew 28:19 is co-equal with them both in terms of knowledge. And yet here, the Holy Spirit isn't even referenced in a text where every single existing being in person, even Son and Father, are referenced. And you want me to take this to Matthew 28 and not think that the Holy Spirit is the Father's Spirit like it's described throughout the Bible? That's not a good conclusion. That's not how solus veritas works, okay? You want to take that approach because of your ecclesiastical authority and traditions? Well, that's you. We use the best available evidence here. And I think what I just presented shows our approach is reasonable and based on the text and context and authorship of the documents we're talking about, and what they're saying, and what the speakers are talking about, and how they could possibly relate to other things they're talked about in the documents that we accept as uniformly authoritative. Right? I didn't have to go very far, but I can't think of anything that would change this. You can interpret things all you want, but again, okay, so we can't read this then. So if you want to tell us that some other text, like Sam likes to do, Sam will give a context for this. He'll say, well, yeah, John 1:1. See, the word's God and word's eternal there. So your view can't be possible here. No, that's not a good argument. That's you being not arguing good again, when I always give you credit for being a good arguer. But by that, I mean a good liar. So it's not really credit, but credit where credit is due. No, see, that's you doing what you do with John 10:30 again. You're going to another text and interpreting it, not what it says, right? What does John 1:1 say? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was theos. There's no person there. There's a distinction between one theos and another theos. That's why one has the article and the other doesn't in the context where they're pros. Not like other texts where the same person is there and no one else is there and there's no pros. The article isn't essential. Well, in John 1:1 it is, because it's pointing something out that's different from two theoi. But one is different from the other, as John goes on to describe. So you would, if you followed Sam and you tried to broaden the context of Matthew, if you just want to, see again, I'm trying to appeal to reasonable Trinitarians. Yes, if you take your Trinitarian interpretation of John 1:1 and say, well, the Word was God, so it's not talking about that here. There's a dual nature there that's not described, and the Holy Spirit is still a person of the Trinity because of other texts that I haven't read yet and that don't say that. But because of Matthew 28:19, they're all three right there, Greg. Why you don't just see Trinity? Well, of course we don't see Trinity because we don't need to see the Trinity, because everything else we're seeing in Matthew is no Trinity. There's no concept. The essential components that define your doctrine aren't here. What happens is the words are here that are a part of your doctrine, and so you just interpret them in light of that. But unless we call you on it, unless we say, well, no, there's no consubstantiality in John 10:30. That's not what he's talking about. He literally says they're accusing him of blasphemy for claiming to be God's son. And he says he wants us to be one with him and the Father the same way that they're one. So we have an actual explanation, like we have the Master literally telling us, I'm telling you that when he shows up, you Trinitarians, I told you what this means. And we can literally say that, hey, we read what you said, just as you want us to be one, just as you two are one. Okay, no Trinity. These guys were telling us you guys were consubstantial. I know. Oh, so we tried to point out what you were telling them. It was like explicitly defined in relation. They used this term kathos. They abused it for you in John 5. And then John 17, when you said it, they're like, what? Trinity. So we're either able to read these texts the way they're written in the context in which they're written or not. Right? Either we require massive substitutions, beliefs about things that aren't stated, or not.